I think certainly there's a lot of relief and satisfaction about the border ceasefire that Pakistan and India recently agreed to. Who knows? Perhaps the U.S. government was even involved in pushing for that. So long as there's a peace process going on in Afghanistan, Pakistan can and should play a key role by virtue of its geography, being a neighbor of Afghanistan, but also by virtue of its relationship with the Taliban and the fact that it has that close relationship. It's able to engage with the Taliban. Now, I do think the Biden administration, like other previous U.S. administrations, is going to expect Pakistan to do things with the Taliban that may be unrealistic. We overstate this notion of Pakistan's leverage over the Taliban, especially as many Taliban leaders that had been based in Pakistan before are no longer there. Many of them still are there, and that suggests that Pakistan may not have as much leverage as Washington might hope. And in an ideal world for the U.S., Pakistan would succeed in convincing the Taliban to agree to an extension of the May 1st deadline, which is when, per the U.S. Taliban deal, all U.S. troops should be leaving Afghanistan. And B, there would be an ideal situation for the U.S. as the Taliban, following Pakistani prodding, would be willing to reduce violence and agree to a ceasefire. This is very ambitious, I think, to have this hope, to expect that any country, even Pakistan, would be able to prevail on the Taliban to do the types of things that it's indicated that it has no interest in doing and has no flexibility over. It's a great question. Iran is key. I think that Pakistan can potentially play a role as a go-between, as a mediator. Pakistan certainly doesn't have a huge strategic relationship with Iran, but there is a pretty good relationship, and I think that Prime Minister Khan has sought to emphasize Pakistan's neutrality in the Saudi-Iranian dispute by highlighting a desire to be more engaged with Iran. Though, of course, this happens at a time when its relationship with Saudi Arabia has struggled a bit. But I do think that Pakistan can be seen as a mediator. And I think that applies to China as well, quite frankly. Pakistan clearly wants the U.S. to have a better relationship with China and a better relationship with Pakistan, because that could have implications, even if only modestly, for CPEC in terms of the type of messaging that you get from the U.S. on CPEC. Even though the U.S. will oppose it, if its relationship with China improves a bit, I think the rhetoric wouldn't quite be as harsh against CPEC. So I think Pakistan could play a role there as a go-between as well with the U.S. and China to try to get them to talk more. There's an opening, there's an opportunity to try to broaden the relationship. And that's because, we're looking at a moment, and it may not happen just yet, but eventually you are going to have the U.S. Departing Afghanistan. And that means that the relationship from a U.S. perspective will be looking for a new anchor, a new basis to animate the relationship. And when I look at the Biden administration, I see an administration that is very interested in pursuing cooperation with countries, Pakistan and others, on what I would describe as borderless threats. So talking about things like climate change and public health risks, pandemics, cybersecurity. There are all types of possibilities, I think, that would be very much of interest to the Biden administration, and by extension, Pakistan. I do think that climate change is a big one. I mean, we know that certainly Joe Biden takes a personal, very strong, emphatic interest in climate change, but this is something that the Pakistani government is also very focused on. Imran Khan, I think, has really demonstrated his commitment to climate change mitigation. So this, I think, if you look at climate change, that could be one big area. I think if you look at the economic side of the relationship, you look at the bilateral trade relationship. The U.S. and Pakistan set new records for bilateral trade volume in recent years. It's still modest relative to U.S. trade volume with many other countries, but still, the trend lines are positive. And the fact that Donald Trump, when he had met with Imran Khan, several years ago and at the White House, he had talked about how, there's U.S. agricultural products are going to Pakistan and contributing to trade cooperation. That's a huge thing to say, given how powerful the agricultural sector is, the very large farmers' constituency here. This idea of talking about sending products out to Pakistan, I think that's very significant. So, we talk a lot about textiles and how that's Pakistan's main product, and if only the U.S. could provide more market access, that would improve things. I don't think that's realistic for political reasons. You need to look at different areas. So, high-tech cooperation. We hear about the IT sector in India, but Pakistan, as I understand it, has its own somewhat more modest, but nonetheless high-growth IT sector. That's an area where there could perhaps be space for cooperation between the two. So I think the important thing is to be creative and look for growth areas beyond the usual suspects. I think certainly the ways in which the government has carried itself in its recent crises with India, the fact that you had the Pakistani government decide to release that captured Indian pilot, which really averted what could have become a deeper crisis and even a war between the two countries. I think that was received very well. And I also think that as India's image has worsened, India has long had a pristine global image, but that's starting to change now, given some of the policies we've seen from the Modi government. I think that sort of helps Pakistan indirectly. But to be quite honest with you, I do think that Pakistan has struggled to strengthen, improve its image. But you look at how things used to be, and clearly things had been very different. There was a time when American actors would go to Pakistan to film movies. You remember, I'm forgetting the name, but back in the 1950s, there was a movie filmed in Lahore. Used to have many American tourists in Pakistan, especially during the hippie era. But things clearly changed. So there's a way to get back to that. And I think one way to get back to that and to strengthen Pakistan's image is you need to have more of the types of not person-to-person exchanges. You need to have more Pakistani visitors in the US. But especially you have to have more American visitors in Pakistan. At the end of the day, these direct interactions with people, if you can get, say, visiting Pakistani students to come to American elementary schools or middle schools or high schools and talk about Pakistan and how it really is, so to speak, you could preemptively shatter a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions when talking to young people. Similarly, if you have Americans go to Pakistan more frequently and see how it really is, that can be very helpful when they come back. And especially if you get influential folks, thought leaders, journalists to go to Pakistan, experience how it is, come back to the US and talk about those experiences.